everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Make It Mania. In today's episode, we're going to be making Tech's helmet from Bad Batch. Now, Tech is one of my favorite Bad Batch characters, because I don't know, I just really like this character, and he has a cool functions on his helmet. But before we get started, make sure you drop down in the comments below what other project you like me to make next, because I need some ideas to get my channel up and going. And so yeah, this is a really fun project to make, so stay tuned. So after you have your first piece printed, I went around most of it and put Bondo all-purpose putty in. This stuff is made for like patching in dents in cars, I believe. So this will make it very strong and very durable. And I just smeared it around most of the big areas. I tried not to get it in the tight spots where it would be hard to sand, but yeah. Then I went around with a mouse sander and sanded all the big parts down, because this would get very old very fast if we did this all by hand. So this speeds up the process a lot faster. Now that you've sanded the majority of it, it's time to get in the tight spaces with some hand sanding. This will make sure that those spots get smoothed in too. So I put some Bondo in one of these little circle things in the front, which was a big mistake because it's very hard to get to the sand. So I'm using a Dremel to try to get as much of it as I can. Now that we used Bondo, I'm going to use a product called Filler Primer by Rust-Oleum, which is like a thick spray paint which fills in all the grooves and crevices that we missed. So I'm going to put a really thick coat on this so later we can sand it. This will probably take 2 to 3 coats. So once you're done with that, you should have your second piece printed right now. So what I'm going to do to hold them together is just take some super glue and drip it on both sides like that. And then some E6000, which is a stronger type of glue and takes longer to dry. So I'm just going to put that on too. And then I'll get my second piece and line it up as best I can. Those cracks where the seam is put together, we can fill those in with Bondo later. So now once the glue is fully adhered, I'm going to use a soldering iron to melt the inside. This will weld the plastic together, which will give us an even stronger bond. You do want to be careful not to breathe this in because you're like burning plastic and it's pretty stinky and not the best for you. Now that you have the second piece stuck on the first, we're going to do the same thing we did with the first piece. We're going to rub Bondo almost all over it so we can get rid of all those layer lines from the 3D print. Then I'm going to use the mouse sander again to smooth it out as best I can so we can save our time from hand sanding. Now this piece took a little bit longer because it's the top and it's pretty big. I'm just going to do the same thing and rub some E6000 along the edges, followed by some super glue, and this time I'm going to put the super glue on the top, E6000 on the bottom, and then I'll line it up as best I can and get a good adhesion. Now I'm going to weld the inside like I did the last time, but this time I have a fan clipped right here to try to blow some of the smoke and fumes away, which will be better for us so we won't have to breathe the stinky stuff. As you can see, I have the ears on the side because I just got those printed and I wanted to see how they looked, so I just left those on. So you might see a slight change in scenery in the background. That's because I had to travel to a different state for some reasons, but I didn't want to leave the project behind, so I brought it with me. So I'm just doing the same thing, smearing Bondo all over the top piece and the ears. Make sure you put a lot on the top because that is where it gets goofed up a little bit. On the top you can see a few rings that don't look good. And I also have the antennas printed, so you can decide if you want to do Bondo on that or filler primer. I just chose to do filler primer. So I didn't have much space to bring the mouse sander, so I decided to use my grandpa's sander, which was better actually because it was smaller and I can get in the tighter seams which was pretty nice. And I just did the same thing with the ears and sanded them as best I could. Then I used some really fine sandpaper to make it as smooth as I could. I believe this is 400 grit, which is really nice because it gives it a nice smooth finish without putting too many dents in it. And I just went over the whole helmet to smooth it all out. Then I got some white Rust-Oleum spray paint and I went over the whole helmet with it, including the ears, because that is the base color of Tech's helmet. Now we finally get to come to the fun part, which is painting, which brings the helmet to life. So in the background I have a reference picture on my computer, and what I did is I used some tape for the lines, like the red lines, to make sure I didn't go over. And since his looks like brushed and not sprayed on, I just went as close to the tape as I could without going on it, so it wouldn't look like a flat line, it would look actually brushed. And then I just painted all the other spots almost black. It was sort of like a really dark gray, and it worked pretty well. So I put some tape on the top so I could draw or paint the red line going down the center. And for most of these paints I used this acrylic set that I got somewhere, and they worked pretty well except for this gray color right here. I bought a big tube from Walmart because I knew I would need a lot of it and I didn't want to have to mix a special color. Now this helmet didn't just come freshly off Camino, so what we have to do is we have to make it look dirty. So what I did was I took some black paint and put a few globs of it in a cup of water and mixed it up really good. And then I wiped it on the helmet, let it sit for a few minutes to dry a little bit, and then I wiped it off with a paper towel. And you do this a couple of times and you can get it to look pretty dirty and pretty nice. And then I did the same thing with the ears, just wiped it on, let it dry a little, and wiped it off. Well, finally it's time to draw the design on Tech's ears. So to do this, I just printed out a picture of the little skeleton lightning bolt thing he has, and then I went to my workstation. So what I did here was I just cut out the spots that I wanted a different color, and again I had a reference picture to see and I checked over it multiple times. And then this is actually a printable like shipping label that you would put on a package if you were to send it. So you peel the back off and it's sticky, which lets you stick it on the box. But in this case I tried to stick it on the plastic, which I did, but when I put paint over it, it did not peel off very well. So I had a different idea. I took some blue painter's tape and put about like 2 rows on this glossy piece of paper, and I stuck the printer shipping labels on it, and I cut the design out in the blue painter's tape. Now this was a really big pain, and I hope I never have to do it again, but in the end it was well worth it. So I did the same thing I tried earlier, only this time with the blue tape, and it worked a lot better. It still was a pain to paint, but it worked when I peeled it off, and that's all that matters. So this is me peeling the tape off very carefully not to peel the paint with it. And after I do that, I'm going to have to use the gray paint to come further in on it because I can't have that white part there. So unfortunately for me, when I looked at the pictures, there's a little white line going around the edge of the black line on the skeleton. So I have to take tape and tape off just a little inch, just a little hair around it all, because I know it will look a lot better if I do. And I realized not only that, but there is a thin black line going around the 2 lightning bolt shapes on the outside. So what I did is I took 2 pieces of tape and I put them almost basically touching, but just a hair apart so I can get a thin black line on the inside. And when I peel it back, I should have a very thin line around the lightning bolt, looking awesome. So for the next step, I'm going to use a piece of polycarbonate plastic sheet, and I'm going to cut 2 circles in it for our lenses on our goggles. Now I purposely cut it a little big so we can use this belt sander to sand it down exactly to size. So I have a little black ring around where I want it to be sanded. I'm just going to sand down exactly to that ring. Then we just peel the protective coating on each side to reveal us a clear piece of plastic. Then just for good measure, I'm going to do a little old hand sanding to make sure it's perfectly smooth. Now what we need to do is add the yellow lenses to give that nice effect. To be doing that, I'll be using some transparent PVC film. I bought this in yellow tint because that's what we need. And this stuff is actually used for putting on your car headlights to give them a tinted effect. But we are obviously not going to be using it for that. We're going to be using it for the real purpose. I just cut off a little piece of this to fit both of our lenses on, and since this was originally made to go on cars, they have a sticky side that you can stick to your headlights. So we'll be using that to just stick on our lenses, but you want to be careful not to get any bubbles in it. Then once you've done that, just take a pair of scissors and cut off the excess. You can choose if you want to super glue the lenses back into your glasses or just pop them in with pressure. I'm just putting them in with pressure because they're holding fine, but if you want something more permanent, you can use super glue. Now it's time to move on to the visor. So for this, I'll just be using those acrylic paints I had, and I'm going to take it and just paint all over the visor. Now I don't have much of this paint, so I tried to make it last by adding a little water, dipping my brush in a little bit of water before brushing it on, and then I did a few coats of that until I liked how it looked. I didn't want to see my brush marks, so what I did was I took a paper towel and wiped gently just to smear the markings a little. If you look on a picture of Tech's visor, it's a little worn around the edges, so I just took some very fine grit sandpaper and lightly rubbed around the edges to give it a scuffed look. So for the most part, these files were great, but there was only one problem. The large antenna wouldn't fit all the way down in the hole. So instead of trying to make the hole bigger or the antenna smaller, I just decided to use a bandsaw to cut it down to size. Then I just used the same color paint that I used to paint the visor and painted all 4 antennas. So to put the antennas on, I just used some super glue, and for the big one I just dabbed it along the side, and for the little one I just put a couple drops in the hole and pushed it in. Next thing I'm going to work on is putting the red light on Tech's glasses. So these files didn't include a hole to put an LED in here, so I decided to just put one there myself. But after I did that, I found this cloudy piece of plastic off a toy car, and I just cut it into a circle and put it in there. It looks pretty good. This will also help us diffuse the light. Okay, so it looks a little messy, but basically what I have is over here, right there, is an LED that I just duct taped to the back, and I got 2 alligator clips on both legs, and I wrapped it around the stem here, so they just come through here, all the way down, and I have it going through a switch, and then this blue one goes to the positive, this red one goes to the negative. When I flip the switch, turns on. This is optional, but very much recommended. After you have all your wires and stuff on the inside, I took some foam floor mats. I think it's 10 millimeters thick. I put a big piece right here in the back and a bunch of little pieces up here in the top. So this will give us a snugger fit on our head. Next thing I did is I took an old phone charger that wasn't really working right. I took a black Sharpie and colored it black. Then I took more of that yellow PVC film and I cut it about the shape of the visor hole so it would fit very nicely inside. Then I just took some more super glue and put a little bit on the inside rim and pushed the PVC film against it to give it a little tack on the inside. Then I took the pieces of that phone charger and cut them up to size, and I pushed them on the inside to hold the visor part in a little better and to give it a nice grip. So this is the final step. All we have to do is put the visor on the helmet. It's pretty straightforward. You just put it on the two nubs sticking out the sides and then put the ears on over it. So let's go test it out, see how it works. For watching. If you haven't already, please ring that bell and click the subscribe button. Give this video a like if you liked it. It really helped the channel. This was a really fun project to make. And again, please leave your ideas down in the description below of what other projects you'd like me to make. And yeah, have a nice day.